Well, I'm now joined by Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, who's the international affairs analyst. He's also an author and an historian, and he's joining us live from Brussels. Dr. Gilbert, my first question to you. While US says that it does not want to escalate the war in West Asia, but US has struck back. First up, do you think these strikes will deter the Iranian-backed groups?
Well, first, we don't know exactly how effective they are. The images which I have seen show that the most important force that was used was B-1 bombers coming from the United States. And that's exactly what they were using, bombs. Now, I understand there are guided bombs, but that's not the same thing as precision missiles. For that reason alone, I think we see this rather high reported deaths of civilians as well as military personnel from the U.S. strikes. The point is that in the past, when the United States used massive destruction against targets in Syria, the net result in terms of operability of the target areas was always very small. So that has to be seen in what way these strikes will frustrate or impede further counterstrikes by the Syrian and Iranian and Iraqi forces. As for Iran, they have been very quiet. It remains to be seen how they will respond, given that emphasis has been made on the supposed presence or believed presence of the Quds, that is to say, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard units, who were conducting training and supervisory work in these facilities of their allies in the Axis resistance. That remains to be seen. If the United States persists in this bombing, and indeed does inflict harm or damage on Iranian forces, then we have the prospect of a full Middle Eastern war.
Okay, that's a very interesting point that you make there, Dr. Gilbert. What kind of response do you really see next in line, as you did bring out how Iran has been very quiet? Now, after the overnight U.S. strikes, do you see the U.S. targets, bombers like you have seen, they've targeted Iraq and Syria, but they've left out Iran. Why do you think that is the case, though?
Well, if they were to touch Iran, as some hotheads in the States like Senator Lindsey Graham have been demanding, then we have a war of a different scale completely, and a war that has to be put into a bigger context. As you know, my primary expertise is in Russian affairs, and 2 days ago on Russian state television, on the most important analytical program of the afternoon and evening, 60 Minutes, one of the panelists, who is quite authoritative and is a regular visitor, said, oh yes, that Russia and Iran are allies. They've used the word allies. Now, we know that a week ago, Russia and Iran concluded a 20-year cooperation agreement, and we know there's a military dimension to it. Nobody has spoken about, as yet, about a mutual defense provision within that. But I think if the word allies is now being used on Russian state television, that there probably is such a provision, and the United States is well advised to watch out.
Okay, what kind of balancing act, you did mention about the balancing act in the first comment there. What kind of balancing act do you think the Biden administration is doing? Well, it was bound to retaliate after the death of the 3 US soldiers in Jordan, while weighing the consequences of escalation, especially this being an election year.
The balancing that's going on is between domestic policy and foreign policy. Traditionally, in American political life, 90% of foreign policy is made from domestic policy, and 10% of foreign policy is made on the basis of the realities of the world outside the United States. And that's what we're witnessing today. The calibrations that were done were only partially, by Washington, were only partially with respect to likely response of the Iranian forces. The greatest interest was how to persuade the American public that the Biden administration is a strong defender of American interests. So they were looking entirely at the domestic audience, and there's enormous risk in that.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Gilbert, for joining us on this broadcast and with your thoughts on this particular topic.
Thanks for the invitation.